When I say the words Columbine or Parkland or Sandy Hook, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably something really tragic. And this has been one of the biggest gun control schemes that's ever been perpetrated, especially over the past 2 decades. But today, we're going to actually break down these numbers and what it actually means and how they've been able to use these events to justify some of the biggest and most restrictive forms of gun control over the past 2+ decades. Now, this kind of came up because I saw a brand new article that talked about kids and their fear of mass tragic type of events. And when I first started doing research, I actually found some statistics that startled me for a minute. But then I used my logic and reasoning and said there's absolutely no way this information that I'm reading right now is true. And come to find out, it isn't, or it's definitely overinflated. The problem is, it's not just people that want to restrict gun rights. Gun owners themselves, actually some of them anyways, believe in restricting gun rights to a degree because of some of these events as well. So I want to break this down and give you the real numbers and who actually is affected and how many people are affected by these mass tragedy events. And so I'd love to hear your opinion on this, man. Is this something that you maybe believed at one time? Did you believe that this many people were actually affected? Or do the real numbers change your opinion on all of this? Let me know down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. The article I read was interesting because it talked about the real fear that students have of being in one of these mass tragedy events and how that shapes their worldview when it comes to gun rights and even makes them lean more towards gun control because of the real amount of fear that they experience. But is this fear justified, I think, is the biggest question. Now, this is in no way to take away from people that have actually been a part of these things, because here's the truth about it all. Whether you believe in gun control or you believe in the Second Amendment fully and remove all restrictions, the one thing we can all agree on, or should be able to agree on, is that all of these events are tragic. And typically, when you think of one of these events, you think of a church, a mall, or even worse, a school. Either way, innocent lives are lost. Here's the first problem I found, though. When I pulled up some statistics from JAMA, which is like a human rights activist sort of group, but definitely left-leaning, they said that 1 in 15 people in the United States experience or were at the scene or somehow involved in one of these mass events. Now, doing some quick math, you're talking about 18 million people have been on the scene, been affected by, or been injured at one of these types of tragedies. My spidey senses started going off at that moment, and I'm like, there's no possible way. And here's where we have our first problem. The definition. What is a mass tragedy? How do you define that? Well, in this study that I found, they use this term pretty broadly. So they will say, okay, 4 or more people are shot or injured at one of these types of events. But it doesn't just involve what we typically would think of as one of these events being at a church, a mall, or a school. What they count also is gang violence, domestic spillovers, even bar fights where guns are pulled. So these are not the things that are going to capture national headlines because they happen in cities throughout the United States every single week, especially in places like Chicago or Memphis. And you guys know that a lot of the tightly controlled, most gun control, type of cities have some of the highest gun crime rates that you can actually factor in. So when you factor in all of that stuff, right, then okay, now you're looking at completely different statistics. So then I found where the FBI showed from roughly the year 2000 to 2022, like 334 active shooter incidents, and then about 50 on-site school type of active shooter situations. What we would all kind of think of and what typically will gather the biggest headlines in the media. That's a far stretch from the numbers that we just talked about. Now again, that's not to take away from each one of these incidents. And that's not to downplay the tragedy and the aftermath that a lot of people have to deal with when these things actually happen. But when you're talking about restricting the rights of millions of gun owners, we better be on the same page about how we define define our terms here and what we're actually calling one of these mass tragic type of events, right? So where JAMA is saying, oh, well, from 2014 to 2024, you had over 4,800 events like this, yet the FBI is counting actual active shooter situations, and they say, no, it's actually like 300 in 22 years. We got a little bit of a problem here. So then out of these events, what they found is about 328 people actually lost their lives. And again, unfortunately, it's a lot of innocent lives, all innocent lives that are lost in these situations where you may have, 10 or 15 or 20 or, in the case of Las Vegas, almost 60 people at one time that are just gone. Unjustifiable and tragic as it is, does that justify the fear that these kids are experiencing going to school? I mean, they found where over half of these kids are like scared about these things happening in their schools. They found where almost 20% of them are like seriously terrified. And again, I'm not going to downplay, kids being afraid of going to school. Ever since my kids have gone to school, this is something that they've always had to talk about and go through, and drills and everything else. So I don't downplay the fear that some of these kids legitimately have. Who I do blame is the media for taking these events and basically making quasi-celebrities out of these shooters, and then, of course, the copycat effect and the publicity that comes along with that, adding to the fear. So when these things happen, they'll take a single event like this and they will blow it up so much that you think, my gosh, this happens every single day in America, and yet they can only report on some of them because they don't have enough time. That's kind of the way they try to amp these things up. Man, there's only so much of these that we can actually cover because they happen every single day, when that is simply not true. If you look at any given year, you're talking about 50 million students from kindergarten to 12th grade, right? Roughly. So if you factor those numbers in, you're looking at about a 1 in a million chance or more of any kid being a part of one of these events. And the other thing is, too, it doesn't even have to be like, one of the high profile events that we're talking about. It could simply be a gun being brought to a school, or a shooting happening near a school. Sometimes they'll factor those things in as well. You're talking about 0.2 to like 0.3% or 0.4% of total crimes in the United States every single year are these types of events. Then when you factor in the people that take their own lives with firearms every single year, the gang violence we talked about, the vast majority of that violence actually being perpetrated with handguns that nobody ever seems to really talk about, we're looking at numbers that are significantly lower than what the media would like you to believe. And again, there's gun owners that have kind of signed on to some form of gun control because they think these things happen all the time. But who's talking about this stuff right now? Nobody really. And that's the pattern. When these things happen, the media talks about it, they blow it up, they make sure they make a quasi-celebrity out of whoever did it, they forget about the victims, kind of, right, because they don't really talk about them, but then nothing is done. Some school districts will take the initiative at quiet moments like this and say, okay, we're going to beef up security. We're going to install metal detectors. We're going to allow our teachers, some of which already have carry permits and everything else, to make sure that they are armed themselves so they don't have to use their own bodies as shields, but they can use like real shields to be able to protect their students. The vast majority of everybody else, quiet, crickets, nothing. That's part of the problem too. It's the knee-jerk reaction where policy is driven by fear, not real data. So essentially what you have happen is a slew of gun control laws will be passed whenever one of these things happens, right? Or the following year, you'll see a slew of these things. I mean, it's led to some of the most restrictive gun control that we have ever seen. Even President Trump took a lot of heat in his first administration for a knee-jerk reaction after what happened in Las Vegas, right? Here's the point though. You have law-abiding gun owners. Vast majority of them will never pull a firearm and never do anything harmful with it ever, but they're the ones that have to pay the price while the crime rates and everything else go pretty much untouched and the numbers don't really change at all. Here's the other part of it that a lot of people have criticized Charlie Kirk for since the wake of his assassination especially. Something that he said that I've said that a lot of people have said too. There is an unfortunate cost to freedom, and people don't want to hear this, but there will be some people that take advantage of that freedom. You can't hold millions accountable, though, for the actions of few. And that's the stance that I take as well. I think that is clear. Because unless you want to become somewhere like Europe and the UK, where eventually gun rights are stripped, not that they've ever really had a Second Amendment ever, but you take the guns away, now you see people arrested for things they say on Facebook or anywhere on social media. Trust me, you don't even have to like guns or the Second Amendment at all, but thank a gun owner the next time you see him, because we are large in part the reason that you can say a lot of the disgusting and truly hateful things that have been said about us, about Charlie, and everybody else. So, you're welcome. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.